Welcome back to another episode of the Pain, Performance, and Pohada podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nick Smith. I'm a licensed physical therapist and strength and conditioning coach for Jiu Jitsu and other combat athletes. Today, we're going to talk about cardio. Cardio and why the majority of the Jiu Jitsu population is doing it wrong. For as long as I can remember training, there's always been this push where cardio can be done simply by just doing hard rounds. I get it in my comments all the time on social media. I get it from teammates, and I just get it from other people just in the comment section on Reddit or other people's posts talking about cardio and how all you have to do is, Pohada every day and, train really hard and hard rounds is going to give you the cardio that you need. And to some degree, doing hard rounds will help you, but there, like a lot of things that I talk about, there's a lot of nuance to that. And more importantly, there's a more tactical way to approach it where you don't nearly have to go as hard. You can actually improve your cardio, and why most of the time the hard rounds is being confused for cardiovascular endurance versus like toughness and being able to push through when you're tired, which is reasonable. So first I want to talk about what are the different components that make up cardiovascular fitness for a grappler. And then I want to dive into the science part, the nerdy part, the different energy systems that are required of you during a specific match, and how you can manipulate them with your training, and probably why the things that you're doing are not quite right. And it might be explaining why you're still gassing out either during your first match or if you're into a deep bracket, why you're getting so tired. And then we'll talk about how to resolve it and things that we can do, manipulate within our own training, things that you can do to track your cardiovascular fitness and to be able to put you in a position where you can set yourself up for success and no longer gas out. So let's start at the beginning as to what the different components are that make up cardiovascular fitness. So first things first, Jiu-Jitsu is a skill acquisition sport. As a beginner, you're going to expend more energy and you're going to be required more of your body to be able to perform tasks, techniques, whatever it may be. And that is going to make you work harder cardiovascularly. As you become more proficient in those movements, the energy expenditure to perform a knee cut, a basic takedown, a guard pass, or a submission is going to be far less for somebody who's 5+ years into the sport versus somebody who's relatively new. So that's the first component. Skill acquisition has a lower energy demand for a more experienced grappler. So your cardio naturally is going to go up just from being a better grappler. The side effect of that is if you are truly training your cardio, you have to push yourself harder in order to do so. Second aspect of this is muscular endurance. So yes, strength training, lifting weights, resistance training, whatever you want to call it, is a byproduct of cardiovascular fitness. There is energy that is required of your body to be able to produce muscular contractions. If you're doing a lot of muscular contractions in the gym, you're building adaptations and efficiency in those particular movements, which will have less of an oxygen demand on your body. If you are stronger than the opponent that is facing you, you will have to put up less force. Therefore, you're going to be more efficient and you won't be as tired. And then there's the actual respiratory system and your ability to transfer oxygen to the rest of your body and building cardiovascular fitness from your heart and your lungs. So those are the three main components of it. Now, for the actual breakdown of this, of the energy systems that our body produces, it's broken down into, you guessed it, 3 categories. So you have the creatine phosphate level, or creatine phosphate phase, which is basically, just think seconds of time. It's your ability to sprint, right? It's your ability to scramble, produce power for a short period of time. We're talking, less than 10 seconds, ideally. And then you have the anaerobic system, which means you're not using oxygen. That is your anaerobic, is like basically your lactate threshold. That phase is more like minutes, 2 to 3 to 5 minutes, basically, an average round. And then you have the aerobic system, which it requires aerobic, meaning with oxygen. That is where your energy system is burning more fat than carbohydrates, which is from the previous ones. And that's thinking more like hours, your ability to sustain work for a long period of time, a full jiu-jitsu class, multiple sessions of rounds, matches for a whole tournament. That's going to have some components of the aerobic system. Now, that's where things like, exogenous creatine is going to help you with the creatine phosphate levels. Making sure that you have a high carbohydrate diet and not being keto is going to help you for the glycolytic system. Glycolytic anaerobic system, super, super important. You need that fuel for that. That's where you're going to be sustaining a certain pace for a moderate amount of time. Most people in jiu-jitsu, if you're on the side of grappling or you've been training long enough, most people don't need a lot of aerobic base. It is good to have, but most people don't need that. Now, if you're gassing out with an average class and you're completely wiped out, might be something to train. So understanding those different categories of what energy systems are being used throughout jiu-jitsu, whether it's a competition match or it's just being a hobbyist and just trying to get through your class and be able to sustain a certain workload, you can then manipulate your workouts in your training volume to cater to those categories. So in most cases, the way I like to think about it, or in the way I transcribe this to my athletes, is you really want to have, assuming your aerobic base is good. I think that some people can improve on that, but that should be like a preseason type of thing. Early in your training phase, maybe you don't have a competition for, 3 months. That first month, you can work on your base, and that's where you can do some lower steady state cardio, what they call blue zones or zone 2. where you're talking about 60% of your heart rate max. Then, as we start to get closer to competition, we want to start gearing our cardio that is surrounded near whatever the time frame is for your matches. So you basically want to be able to do, let's say you're a masters athlete, you have a 5-minute round. You want to basically be able to do 5-minute rounds repeatedly for like 10 rounds. Like ideally, let's say you're going to Masters Worlds and you have, 8 matches to win. You need to be able to basically put out 5 minutes of hard work and repeat that 8 times. That's what we're building for. If I'm training somebody for Masters Worlds, that's the amount of cardio that I need them to be able to do. So during that time, when you are training on the mats, there are going to be periods of time where you're not putting out that much effort. If you're rolling through drills, you might be in zone 1, zone 2, maybe. Then you're going to have maybe hard rounds, right? Those hard rounds might put you in zone 4, maybe some tad bits of zone 5, where you're like upwards of 90% of your heart rate max. And what people don't realize is during that time of hard rounds, unless you are monitoring it, wearing some kind of wearable, like if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm pointing to my Whoop. This is what I give my athletes who train their cardiovascular fitness. Unless you have some kind of wearable to actually tell you what your heart rate monitor is, you're going to be going off of perceived exertion, which perceived exertion is great. It is better than just shooting in the dark. But perceived exertion sometimes does not line up perfectly with what you're actually putting out metabolically. For example, there are training sessions that I have where I think that I am going balls to the wall, full send, training my ass off, and I never hit zone 5. And I'm talking afterwards like want to puke. I feel like I put out a 10 out of 10 effort, and my heart rate did not actually match that. So despite my perceived exertion being 9, 10 out of 10, my heart rate never got into those zones that I was trying to train. We can manipulate that data to basically say like, hey, you were tired. You should have, gone more moderately. But also for those who are not tracking their actual heart rate, you might have this misconception that you are training really, really hard and you're getting your heart rate into the upper ranges when you're actually not. And then when it's time to get into your jiu-jitsu matches and you're competing, you might actually get into those heart rates because you're going harder. It's competent. It's much, you're pushing it. You're really just like pushing beyond your normal threshold. And then your body actually can't sustain it because you've never actually gotten into those ranges before. So that's why it's really important to have some kind of monitoring system to be able to track, are you actually getting into those heart rate ranges that you need to, and understanding what each one of those zones means for those particular energy systems. So that being said, to kind of categorize it and keep it simple, zone 2, blue zone, is going to be like, hey, that's your overall baseline. For jiu-jitsu, you might do some steady state running. You might do some steady state biking, something that's pretty easy. Your perceived exertion is going to be moderate, 5 to 6 out of 10. It's going to be probably what you would accumulate for the majority of your class of a jiu-jitsu class, assuming that your sparring is not super hard. Then for your actual competitions, it's really hard to sprint for 5 minutes, right? You can't give 100% effort. So usually what I like to tell my athletes is we're working for this like zone 4, or if it's like a car, you're in 4th gear, 5th gear if you got a 6-speed. Let's say you have a 6-speed. You want to be operating in, gear 4. Gear 4 allows you to be at a really high pace, but you can always shift up and kick it into gear 6, right? You need to sprint. There's a scramble opportunity. There's a takedown opening. You're escaping from something. You should be able to turn that on and then quickly downshift back to gear 4 and be able to sustain that pace again. So when we're training actual cardiovascular fitness, we want to gear our cardio with interval sprints is a way to do it, plyometrics. You can even do this with drilling for timed periods where you can have a certain time period of like, hey, I'm going to go this hard at this pace for this long and repeat that. So that way you're able to train your gear 4 to be more efficient. You want to have better gas mileage, so to say. And then if you jump into 6th gear, you shift up and you really sprint, you're not completely depleting the system, and you're able to just jump right back into downshift to gear 4 and can keep doing that over and over again. Most people, what will happen is they'll shift up into 6 and they'll completely dump their load and they can never get back to 4, and they're just tapering off, getting lower and lower. They no longer have that gear. 4th gear is no longer accessible. They're stuck in gear 2 or 3. And this is what people fail to do during their training. They're like, oh, I'm having hard rounds, but they've never actually recovered. They're like, oh, no rest rounds. I'm going to fucking push through this and go as hard as I want to. So you never actually get back to gear 4, which is like your true competition speed, because you're so exhausted and you haven't recovered from that. You only can access gear 2 or gear 3. But your perception of it, you think you're going really hard when in reality, you're not. So this leads me into rest rounds. Rest rounds, if done appropriately, should be a means of time to make sure that your heart rate gets back down to what it was at baseline before you started your workout. And I train this with my athletes, not only be able to put out the power for that amount of time, but to be able to recover within, let's say you have a 5-minute match, you have 5 minutes to recover before you do it again, like worst case scenario. You need to be able to get your resting heart rate down to what it was at baseline in 5 minutes. So training your rest rounds in practice systematically is a really great way to simulate the competition. Now, if you're somebody who's not able to train that often, or you're just trying to be a hobbyist, you can use active recovery rounds. You're just trying to get through it. This is more for specific competition training, and this is why people gas out. So being able to go really hard for your round, whatever's in class, and then use that rest round to truly rest, recover, monitor your heart rate, get it back to baseline, to be able to put out that exertional level again, hit back into that gear 4, so to say, or whatever your energy system is attacking for that specific workout. So really, really important to utilize those rest rounds and not just be like, oh, hard rounds all the time. So there's a lot of different ways to address this. The other thing to consider with hard rounds and sparring is the amount of, I don't want to say damage isn't the right word, but the amount of impact that puts on the body, not just cardiovascularly, but just on your joints, the bruising, the soreness, the load on your central nervous system is so much higher during sparring. If you're truly working on cardio, doing sprint intervals on a rower, a ski erg, a fan bike. I'm looking at my Echo bike right now. Doing that is going to be far less demanding on your central nervous system, but still train your cardiovascular system in a way that's productive for jiu-jitsu. So you can't go into practice. It's not sustainable to just go hard rounds every single time you show up, especially if you're trained 4 or 5 times a week. You really only got like maybe 1 or 2 sessions a week of like hard rounds in. The rest of it should be drilling, lower intensity stuff where you can work on your game, and also training those other energy systems that we talked about. So hope I gave you some clarity around this. If you're somebody who's like, hey, hard rounds all the time, you might want to rethink that. There's a much smarter approach, a much more tactical approach. I could dive into the whole, wearable with the Whoop even more, but having some kind of way to track and monitor how much effort you are actually putting in, not just perceived effort, is a great way to start. And also making sure that you are training in a way that is focused on the energy systems in which you were weakest in. So if you notice that you're like, hey, I got 1 good round in, but then by match 2 or 3, I'm smoked. Or, hey, I can be at a certain amount, but if I really get into like that hard sprint, I just adrenaline dump and I'm done. Understanding where those stations are, or even like, oh, my grips are gone, after 1 match. Is it a muscular endurance type of situation? So being able to take those things into consideration, figure out where your limitation is what you should approach somebody with. And this isn't something necessarily you should be able to figure out on your own. A good strength and conditioning coach who works with these type of athletes and understands how to prioritize your training is going to be able to tell you exactly what you need to do to prep for your specific matches. If you're like, hey, I got 5-minute rounds, probably going to have 3 or 4 matches, or I'm doing, gi and no gi, I'm going to have 5 or 6 matches. Okay, cool. We're going to prep for that. If you're a black belt and you have a 10-minute round IBJJF, that is going to be a different energy system because you're not going to be sprinting the entire time. It's a nice controlled pace. It gets turned up, turned down, depending on the flow of the match. So if you're somebody who's lost in this and you're like, fuck, I cannot figure out my cardio, go reach out. Reach out to me. I have some great resources that I can point you towards to be able to kind of fluctuate this stuff. Or if you're just like, man, I don't want to guess anymore. I want to know exactly what I need to do. I want to train like a professional. Even if you're not competing, or even if you're competing at a low level, you can still train like a professional. The way I approach this coaching with strength and conditioning is geared towards professionals. So whether or not you are a professional or not, you're going to train like one. So if you have any questions about that, you can always connect with me in the show notes. Until next time, it's another episode of the Pain Performance and Powhatan podcast. See you on the mats. See you.